If you have your Bibles, please turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 3. We're going to continue our series through this incredible book. We're looking at how we live life backwards. Those of you who were here last week got to listen to, how do I put this? The saddest sermon I've ever preached. Those of you who were here last week got to listen to the most disheartening discourse, the most miserable message, the most painful preach in the history of Midtown Church. Last week's sermon was depressing. And if you were not here to hear that sermon, I don't want you to feel excluded. Far be it from me to take away that melancholic message from you. So let me summarize. Using the first two chapters of Ecclesiastes, I pointed out that Kohelet, the teacher, teaches us four truths about life. And these truths are for every single one of us. There's no exceptions, there's no exclusions, there's no exemptions. They apply to each and every one of us. And those four truths are that life is short. We have it, and then it's gone. It's a breath. On a cold day, you see it, and then it just disappears. Life is short. Life is repetitive. Seasons come and seasons go, and we have no control over that. Life is elusive. Like the wisp of smoke after you blow out a candle. You can see it, and it's real, but you cannot grab hold of it. And the fourth truth was that that at the end of the day, we gain nothing. We come naked into this world and we leave in the same way. Okay, now you're as sad as the rest of us. You're all caught up. My wife has a hobby that I just don't really understand. Kim really loves puzzles. Like, she really loves puzzles. I don't get it. I really don't. Like, does anyone like puzzles? Who likes puzzles? Why? So Kim will spend hours, no, days, putting a puzzle together, and she's very loud about it. It's an audible process. I hear, no. Ooh, yeah, it fits. She talks to herself the whole time, and then she'll call me at the end and she'll say, "Love, look how beautiful it is," and I go, "It's on the box. You don't have to build it. Like, were you expecting something else? Like, it's there." No, I tell you this because Kim has a deliberate process. And I know this is a deliberate process because I mess with it. I move pieces around when she's not looking. What she does is she puts all the colors, all the groupings, and then she takes all the flat edges and she makes her border, right? Why do I tell you that? I tell you that because those four truths that Kohelet teaches in the first two chapters are not the overall picture. They're the frame. They're the border of the puzzle. They're just the border. They're there to finish off the ultimate picture, which we now start getting to. And in the first two chapters, Kohelet deliberately uses two terms to teach us about these truths. He uses the phrase "under the sun," and he uses it 9 times, and it represents, at the end of the day, a life without God, under the sun, the time we have on this earth, but also a life without God. The second term that he uses is the phrase meaningless. It's the Hebrew word hevel. It means a breath or a mist, a vapor that's here and then it's gone. And he uses that 13 times in the first few chapters to point to the brevity of our time on this earth. But then at chapter 3, Kohelet introduces 2 new concepts. And they're not only new, they're kind of counter concepts to what he's already been speaking about. And the first concept that he introduces is the activity of God. In the first two chapters, God doesn't really play a role. And then in chapter 3, we see that God starts to act, the activity of God. And then the second concept that Kohelet adds is the reality of eternity. Eternity. Now, before we read what he says, I just want us to see how he introduces these two concepts. Because what he does is fascinating. If you look at the first two chapters, you could almost say the ramblings of someone who's trying to sort out what's going on in his life. And he's meaningless. Work is not worth it. Life's not worth it. And then suddenly in chapter 3, he stops and he now speaks to us in a completely different way. And he uses numbers to get the point across. Now, we're not 2,000-year-old Semitic Hebrew people, so we don't really grasp this. But in the Hebrew culture, numbers were not just numbers. Numbers conveyed spiritual concepts. And so what Kohelet does is he introduces the number 7 and the number 2 as he introduces us to the work of God and eternity. So to the ancient Israelites, the number 7 represented completion, like perfection, totality, not leaving anything out. And so we see in the Old Testament, in Genesis, 7 days of creation, 7 days of the week, 7 candles in the candelabra in the temple. In the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, there are tons of examples. There's 7 churches, 7 bowls, 7 seals, 7 trumpets. But this idea of 7 being completion. And the number 2 was also important because the number 2 represented the accuracy and the authority of what was being said. And so in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, and in fact, in Jesus himself states that 2 witnesses are required to authenticate a statement. And so Kohelet uses multiples of 2 to make this point. And so at the start of chapter 3, he uses number 7 and number 2 to tell us that what he's saying is important and he's covering everything and it's valid and it's true. So he starts by referring to time in 2 ways. He says there is a time for everything and a season for every activity. 2 concepts. But this is then followed by a group of 7 examples, followed by another group of 7 examples. 2 groups, 7 examples. And in each group, there are 2 examples. So we've got this recurring theme of the numbers 7 and 2. But why? What's the point? The point is Kohelet is saying, this is important. Wake up, look at me. You need to listen to what I'm about to say. In our family, when the girls were young, they're both ADD years like their dad. So like they would, like you talk to them and they're like squirrels. And we'd always have to go, look in my eyes, look in my eyes. And that's what Caleb's doing. He's saying, hey, look in my eyes. This is important. You need to listen to this. Take note. So let's read together. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken away from it. God does it so that people will fear him. Our Father, just as we look at just this morning, as we start to look at how you start to invade the story of Ecclesiastes, won't you also invade the stories of our lives? Help us to see where you're working. Help us to see your presence. Won't you encourage us this morning? So what I want to do is I want to look at a few lessons that we can look at that Kohelet introduces. I know the last two sermons that I've done have kind of been heavy on theology, so I want to briefly look at some lessons, and then I want to make application to our lives. First lesson is this: we were made for eternity, but we are held captive by time. We were made for eternity, but we are held captive by time. We were made for the life to come, but we are bound to this life. We are made for what is next, but we are constrained by what is now. We have eternal souls made for the afterlife, but we live in perishing bodies in this life. We were made for eternity, but we are held captive by time. This is what the teacher Kohelet says. He says, I've seen the task that God has given the children of Adam to keep them occupied. He has made everything appropriate in its time. He has also put eternity in their hearts, but no one can discover the work God has done from beginning to end. We're obsessed with manipulating time. We dream about it. We wonder if it's a reality. In fact, some of our favorite movies involve manipulating time. There's Doctor Who in the TARDIS. There's Marty McFly and Doc Brown in the DeLorean. There's Doctor Strange and the Time Stone. We imagine manipulating time, but try as we might, we never will be able to. We are confined to the time that God has placed us in. Try as we might, dream as we want, that will not change. On the 28th of June, 2009, the British astrophysicist Stephen Hawking held a time travelers party. On the 28th of June, 2009, he held a party for time travelers. He arranged champagne, balloons, banners. He arranged good food, everything that a party needs. 28th of June was the party. He sent out the invitations on the 29th of June, 2009. And Stephen Hawking's his argument was, well, I'm going to hold a party for time travelers. I'll send out the invitation after the party. And then if time travel's possible, who doesn't want to meet with Stephen Hawking? They'll make it to my party. Stephen Hawking's waited in that room hour upon hour, and no one ever showed up. We imagine what it might be like to manipulate that time, and our desire comes from the fact that we have this thread of eternity in us. God has put eternity in our hearts. We know that there must be something more to this life. We know that this is not it. That there's something more. There's something outside of just living under the sun. God has put eternity in our hearts. And the question is, when? Does God put eternity in our heart when we die? When our mortal bodies come to their end, does God then put eternity in our heart? No, Kohelet uses the past tense. He says God has said eternity. He's already done it. And this is important because it tells us that even though we are constrained and confined and restricted to this life, there is a golden thread that ties us to the next life. And that we're reminded that even though life is short and repetitive and elusive and we gain nothing, that's not all there is. There is something more. There is something better. Our lives now and our lives to come are not isolated. They are connected. Our time on earth and stepping into eternity is separated by death, but they're not separate. Our lives under the sun and our lives in eternity are very, very different, but they are not disconnected. And that brings us to one of the key concepts that Kohelet makes. He teaches this: if we are constrained by this life, and we are, but if there is an eternal aspect to our lives, and there is, then this life matters. It may be short, it may be brief, it may be transient, but that does not mean it has no meaning. Our lives have purpose and meaning and value. After reminding us that we were made for eternity, that's exactly the point that Kohelet makes. He says this: He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live. Second lesson: God is sovereign over both time and eternity. Okay, let's start off this passage by that statement. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. And then those two groups of 7 examples. And we've got to be careful that we don't read this with an attitude of fatalism. Like, yes, there's a time for everything. Yes, there's a time to be born, a time to die, a time to sow, a time to reap. We got to be careful we don't read it with that sense of fatalism. Because what's important is not the examples, but what Kohelet says before the examples. He says this: there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. Why is this important? Because in the preceding 2 chapters, Kohelet has told us about his activities, what he did, his experiments, what he did, his work, the pleasures that he had. He talks about his work. And then at the end of it all, he says, all that I did, all of my building and my toiling and my pleasure and just growing my wealth, all of that at the end of the day was nothing, absolutely nothing. And he makes that point twice in the first 2 chapters, talking about humans in general. He says, what do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? And the answer is nothing. And then he talks about his own exploits. He says, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet, when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. And after Kohelet comes to that conclusion, that everything I did is gone. None of it remains. He then compares to what God has done. And Kohelet says, I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. Ecclesiastes is a strange book in so many ways. It's just sometimes, frankly, it's bizarre. And one of the ways in which it is slightly unique is that throughout the entire book, the name of God used is always and only the name of God, Elohim. The name used to describe an all-powerful, almighty creator God. It's the only title or name used for God in the whole book. And the point is this. Yeah, life has uncertainties. We are not in control. Our lives come and our lives go, and it's fearful even knowing that. But there is an almighty, all-powerful creator God who is sovereign over time and our lives. Third lesson, God uses these different seasons to draw us to himself. Coelho says God, has made everything appropriate in its time. Life consists of different seasons. Right? That's true for the natural world. Just the seasons follow each other as one season after another. That's just the order of our natural world. Life consists of seasons. It's true in the natural world, but that's also true in our lives. We have seasons of plenty and seasons of scarcity. We have seasons of light and seasons of darkness. We have seasons of sadness and seasons of joy. Seasons come and seasons go. And again, that idea that seasons come and go is reflected in that list found in Ecclesiastes 3. Now again, it's easy to read it with the sense of fatalism. And I must be honest, I often do this. When I'm in a frustrating season or a season of discomfort or a season where I feel like God's just pressing in on me, I'll say things like, it is what it is. And I don't mean that as a statement of faith. I mean it as it is what it is. Each season that we have is ordained by God. And that means there is a purpose. And through the seasons that we have, God uses them to draw us towards himself. That's what Kohelet says. He says, I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it, nothing taken away from it. God does it so that people will fear him. And it doesn't mean fear is be afraid, but fear is be in awe of, coming to a relationship with. God directs your seasons so that you can come into a place where you are in awe of him. You fear him in the good sense. We have no control over the seasons. If we had, I would have snow every day, every single day. Snow days forever. But we don't have control over the seasons. We don't. God does. Coelho later reflects, he says this. He says, so I reflected on all this and concluded that the righteous and the wise and what they do are in God's hands. King David echoes the same sentiment. He says, but I trust in you, Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hands. Each season is ordained by God. We have to see that every season we're in is ordained by God. He's sovereign. He hasn't made a mistake. He hasn't lost sight of the plan. It's not out of his control. Our seasons are ordained and have a purpose. Paul, putting it to the Christians in Rome, says, and we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose. Every season has a purpose. Season of blessing, God's pushing you to gratitude and worship. Season of trials, God's pushing you to dependence on him. Season of waiting, the worst of all, God's drawing us to patience and trust. Season of change, God's drawing us to surrender. I want to now move to just some applications from those 3 lessons and from this passage. Just 3 applications that I want us to kind of take home and just chew on as we go through this week. And the first application is this: be careful. Be careful what you fill the vacuum with. Be careful what you fill the vacuum with. There is an everness. I know that's not a word, but there's an everness inside of us. We know that there's a foreverness out there. We know that. It's in our hearts. It's deep inside of us. Right deep down, we know that there's more to this life. That sets us apart from all the animals. Lions do not lie and look at the stars and just wonder how small they are in the scheme of things. Bears don't lie awake all night wondering if they have the right job. Sloths do not make New Year's resolutions saying, next year, I'm going to go faster. Next year, I'll be faster. It's only us that know there's something more, far more than what happens under the sun. There's a longing in us for more. There's a vacuum, an emptiness. Aristotle first coined the phrase, nature hates a vacuum. He actually said, nature abhors a vacuum. And I knew if I said that with my accent, people would be like, what? So I used synonym. Aristotle said, nature hates a vacuum. And he explained it this way. He said, if there's a vacuum in nature, something will fill it. There are no natural vacuums. Something will fill a vacuum. I have the world's worst eating habit. It drives Kim crazy. But I will go an entire day without a single morsel of food. I don't think about it. Doesn't cross my mind. I'll have a gym session or I'll go for a run. Doesn't make me any hungrier. I will go the entire day without a single morsel of food until 5:30 p.m. And suddenly this cavernous vacuum starts to open up. And then I will you better hide small children and chihuahuas because I'm just going to shovel it in. And generally I fill that vacuum with junk. Just feed me, Seymour. If you get that, fantastic. I just fill that vacuum with junk. There is a God-shaped vacuum inside of us. We may not verbalize it like that, but you know it's there. And I want to encourage you to be so careful what you fill that vacuum with. You're going to fill it with pleasure. Are you going to fill it with possessions? Are you going to fill it with work? What are you going to fill that vacuum with? It's there. French mathematician and philosopher Blaise Pascal, I'm sure you've heard this quote, but he said this. He said, there is a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of every man, which cannot be filled by any created thing, but only by God, the Creator, made known through Jesus. You have a vacuum. Be careful what you fill that vacuum with, because you know what? It's so easy to fill it with junk. Be careful what you fill the vacuum with. Second application is don't become time blind. Don't become time blind. We are constrained by time. And the very real danger, because we're constrained by time, the very real danger is that we imagine that this season is it. We're in winter, and someone says, yes, but spring's coming. No, but it's winter. Someone says, yeah, but the sun's rising slightly earlier. No, it's winter. There's already little buds. No, it's winter. And we become time blind. We think that what's going on is all there is. And when we become time blind, we fail to see two things. Firstly, we fail to see that there is more to the season, that this season isn't it. Imagine you're going camping. Kim and I, well, not camping, touring. Let's say touring, and we love BC. BC is incredibly beautiful, right? Except for Kamloops. I always imagine that if Canada had a fuzzy navel, Kamloops is the fuzzy navel of Canada. It's just, right? Imagine you're going on a camping trip and you, for some reason, the road's closed and you have to spend some time in Kamloops. Do you throw up your hands and say, well, that's it. This is my vacation. I'm staying in the fuzzy navel of Canada. No, you know that there's something more. You know that the overnight stay is not the destination. The overnight stay is not the destination. And when we become time blind, we don't see that. And secondly, when we become time blind, we fail to see that God is right there. A bad season makes us feel like God's abandoned us, but it's not true. Paul, speaking in Mars Hill, outside of Athens, says this: the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man, he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history. He marked out their appointed times. He said there are going to be times where I'm going to do this in their lives. And why did God make those appointed times? So that he could sit back and watch us struggle. So that he could look upon us and say, these measly humans, look at them. No, God appointed times for us. Why? Paul says he marked out their appointed times in history. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he's not far from any of us. Paul says God appointed your seasons. He appointed those times, and he did it so that you would reach out. And when you do, you'll find out he's not far away. Job comes to the end of an horrific season, just an awful season. And he's not yet restored. He's still sitting there in loss and pain. And he looks back at the season he's just come through and he says this: my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Third application: use the rearview mirror to help you to face forward, to drive forward. There are two ways to live life backwards. And Pastor Matt did an amazing job a couple of weeks ago looking at that big picture of heading down a river, and there's a waterfall, and at the end of the waterfall is death and judgment. And there's nothing we can do about it. We can try and paddle as hard as we want. We will eventually go over the waterfall, and that's it. And that's what the narrator says right at the end. He says, now all has been heard. This is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God, keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. There's another way that you can live life backwards. Let what you see in the rearview mirror help you drive forward. Imagine you're on a one-way road. So one way, you cannot go back, you cannot turn around. You can only go on the road. And you're driving on this road, and you look in the rearview mirror. And as you do that, you see what was. You see what was, but is no longer. You catch a glimpse of what you've just been through. But you can't drive like that, right? What happens if you drive just looking in the rearview mirror? You're probably going to hit a moose, right? So the point is, when you drive, you look at the rearview mirror, but then you look at where you're going. And that's what Kohelet does. Kohelet says, I'm reminiscing about yesterday. And yesterday was short, and it was over before I knew it. It was like a wisp. It was like a vapor. Yesterday was just it was hevel. Yesterday was just hevel. It came and it went. But then every single time, and I don't mean occasionally, I mean every single time that Kohelet looks in the rearview mirror and says, that's short. It's over so quick. It's hevel. Every single time he does that, he looks forward and comes to a judgment about how he's then going to live that day. Look what he says. He looks in the rearview mirror and he says, all their days, all people, us, all their days, work is grief and pain, and even at night their minds do not rest. This is meaningless. And then he says, a person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too I see is from the hand of God, for without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? And then later on, he looks in the rearview mirror and he says, yesterday, surely the fate of human beings is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. All have the same breath. Humans have no advantage over the animals. Everything is meaningless. All go to the same place. All come from dust, and to dust all return. Who knows? Who knows if the human spirit goes up and the spirit of the animal goes into the earth? And he follows that with. So I saw that there is nothing better for a person to enjoy their work, because that is their lot. He looks in the rearview mirror and he says, this is a grievous evil. As everyone comes, so they depart. And what do they gain? For they toil for the wind. All their days they eat in darkness with great frustration, affliction, and anger. And then he says, but this is what I've observed to be good, that it is appropriate for a person to eat and to drink, to find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun, during the few days of life God has given them, for this is their lot. He looks in the rearview mirror, and what's behind him, and he says, we all share a common destiny. The righteous and the wicked, the good and the bad, the clean and the unclean, those who bring sacrifices and those who don't. As it is with the good, so it is with the sinful. As it is with those who take oaths, so it is with those who are afraid to take them. This is the evil in everything that happens under the sun. The same destiny. Looks in the rearview mirror. Same. And then he adds, the hearts of people, moreover, are full of evil. There's madness in their hearts while they live, and afterwards they join the dead. Anyone who is among the living has hope. Even a live dog is better off than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no further reward, and their name is forgotten. Their love, their hate, and their jealousy have long since vanished. Never again will they have a part in anything that happens under the sun. And then he says, so, eat your food with gladness. Drink your wine with a joyful heart, for God has already approved what you do. Always be clothed in white, and always anoint your head with oil. Enjoy life with your wife whom you love, all the days of your meaningless life that God has given you under the sun. All your meaningless days. For this is your lot in life and in your toilsome labor under the sun. Whatever your hands find to do, do it with all your might. Kohelet says, You look in the rearview mirror, you see how quick and how fleeting everything is. So if it is, and it is, then the road ahead of you, enjoy it. Take in the view. Look at those mountains. Look at those trees. Look for little bears on the side of the road. Look for eagles. Enjoy the road. So what? Life is a gift. And I don't mean that in a bumper sticker kind of way. Right? You can go to the store and get this. Life is a gift. That's why it's called the present. Like you get these corny little bumper stickers. But I don't mean it in a bumper sticker way. I mean it because that's what Scripture says. In our reading today, this is what Kohelet says. He says, I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. This is the gift of God.